Soldier, spy, rebel, and terrorist. Today, we're diving in to Saw Gererra. What is up, nerdlings, and welcome back to my channel! If you're new, welcome. I'm your host, Danny Sonsasi, licensed cosmetologist and registered super nerd, and this is Comics and Cosmetics, the show where I talk about whatever nerdy topic I've been obsessing about that week while doing my makeup at the same time, while you watch. Before we go any further, make sure you smash that like button, blast the subscribe, and ring that bell so you get notified whenever I'm back with another one of these magnificent videos. If you would like to keep up to date with everything that's going on here at the channel, make sure you follow us on all of the socials. Just search Comics and Cosmetics. Especially on Twitter, you will be kept up to date on what is going on. Sometimes I tend to show up on other channels and podcasts, so keep an eye out for that. We also have a Patreon, which is the best way to support the channel if you so choose. You can support the channel for as little as $3 a month. There are 3 different tiers, and it all starts with the hashtag nerdling tier for $3 a month. But with each and every single one of those tiers, not only do you get merch, but you get a suggestion box. That is right, nerdlings. You get the opportunity to choose what I break down for you, what I cover, and what I inspire my makeup looks off of while I'm talking about them. That was a mouthful. This week's topic came from our Patreon suggestion box. That's right, Mr. Steve Long of Rogue One Radio, who has been a hashtag nerdling for quite some time. So, I want to thank him for this awesome suggestion. I really hope this is a good one. But thank you, Steve. Thank you for this week's topic suggestion. I also want to thank our sponsors, herbalhanna.com. Got a little promo code for you right there. Just make sure while you're perusing all their awesome, organic, and skin-sensitive products, when you go to checkout, make sure you enter that promo code exclusive for nerdlings like you to get 15% off of your purchase. Now, this week, as I told you, from the future, we're talking about the original rebel himself, Saw Gererra. For those of you who watched last week's drop, which turned out to be an unboxing and a review, then you will recognize the brushes that I will be using from now on. And they just so happen to be Comics and Cosmetics Blue. I am in love with Delium brushes. In love. So, stop what you're doing because they have a really awesome September sale. So run over there, get you some Delium brushes, and tell them Comics and Cosmetics sent ya. Now, Saw is a resistance fighter. You may recognize him from movies like Rogue One. And if you watched Clone Wars, Rebels, Bad Batch, and if you played Jedi Fallen Order, you'll recognize him from there too. Little did we know, he is one of the most integral resistance fighters in all of the rebellion. If it wasn't for Saw Gererra and his sister Steela, there may have never been a rebellion. Now, Saw is an Odarion. Okay? He's an Odarion resistance fighter. And he was one of the leading Ondarian rebels. This is ridiculous. He fought against the Separatists, otherwise known as the Confederacy of Independent Systems. And he fought on Onderon during the Clone Wars. He and his younger sister Steela were instrumental in the rebel liberation of their homeworld. And this was during the Onderonian Civil War. He later became a key member in the fight against the Galactic Empire and the formation of the Alliance to restore the Republic. Now, his tactics against the Empire led him to be seen as an extremist, one whose notoriety was recognized not only by the Empire itself, but many years later by the New Republic. In the early resistance against the Separatist Alliance on Onderon, or is it Onderon? Gererra and his fellow soldiers were outnumbered by the Separatist droid army. They had requested help from the Jedi High Council, which, did lead the Grand Army of the Republic in its fight against the Separatists. But the Jedi Order chose not to get involved. Where have we heard that before? They didn't want to be seen as actively involved in the fighting on Onderon or Onderon. Instead, they sent some folks to train Saw, his younger sister Steela, and some guys on some techniques as sort of advisors, But before we get all wrapped up in that story, we need to know more about Saw as a person, who he is. What's his motivation? I see Saw as kind of this guy that's been living with a broken heart. He's very passionate about his beliefs. He's willing to do whatever it takes. But he's kind of this old war dog that just keeps getting kicked, so that's what he expects. Now, Saw was born on the jungle planet of Onderon. And this was during the last years of the Galactic Republic. He grew up within the walls of the capital city of Isis with his sister Steela, his younger sister. He learned to greatly respect the Onderonian monarch, King Ramses Dendup. In 24 BBY, thousands of star systems seceded from the Republic and formed their own galactic government, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Within 2 years, that would be 22 BBY, the Confederacy and the Republic broke out into all-out war. King Dendup, wishing to keep his people kind of out of the conflict, sided with neither. He took the Switzerland approach. I want no part of either one of you. Not more than a year after the opening salvos of the Clone Wars were fired during the Battle of Geonosis. The Clone Wars continued to sustain itself on battlefronts across the galaxy. At this time, at the behests of the Confederate head of state council, Dooku of Sereno, Dooku, sounds like Dookie. He's got the coolest Sith name ever, and no one calls him Darth Tyrannus, but Dookie. Count Dookie. Fine. So, at the behests of Count Dookie, the Separatist droid army invaded Saw's homeworld and subjected its citizens to Confederate law. And to make matters worse for Saw, King Dendup was ousted from his royal throne and replaced with Sanjay Rash, who was, of course, just a puppet leader with Dookie pulling his strings. King Rash enacted a royal proclamation, as kings do. It declared that anyone who tried to usurp him from his throne would be declared a terrorist. Troubled for Onderon's future, as any Onderonian would be, and undeterred that he and Steela had been banished from ISIS for the hopes of forming a resistance, just like hoping to form a resistance, they get banished from their hometown. About 2 years later, in 20 BBY, Saw had become the self-proclaimed leader of his Onderonian rebels. And as a result of being banished from ISIS, the rebels took up with the resistance in an abandoned outpost within a group of ancient ruins in sector S29 of the wilderness. Around this time, Lux Bonteri, who was the son of the late senator for Onderon for the Galactic Senate, Mia Bonteri, joined Saw and his resistance. You know, as soon as he felt like he had enough small arms, ordnances, and armor to supply his forces, Saw, Steela, and Bonteri plotted to take back ISIS for Onderon. The rebel leaders, however, after a number of small skirmishes and battle with droid forces, came to the realization that they were both under-equipped and neither had the training nor skills to wage war against the Confederacy for independent planets. Therefore, Saw Bonteri reached out to the Republic requesting aid. As a result, the esteemed Jedi High Council on the Republic's capital world of Coruscant heard Saw and Bonteri's story via HoloNet transmission, and Master Yoda promised that the Jedi Order would find a way to help them. But they didn't really want to get actively involved. They didn't want to be seen as actively involved. So they sent a few emissaries, or advisors, if you will, to kind of teach them how to be better soldiers and teach them how to use the weapons and ordnance that they had. And who were these emissaries / advisors that they sent? So glad you asked. They were none other than Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin's Padawan Ahsoka Tano, and Captain Rex, also known as Trooper CT-7567. Now, before the Jedi and Rex got there, Saw was alerted to an intrusion in the jungle in Sector S11. Steela had led a squad to go and investigate, as you do. And when she got back, she saw that Yoda had fulfilled his promise and the Jedis were there. Not as many as they had hoped, but, I mean, something's better than nothing. Anakin lets him know that they can't fight in the Onderonian Civil War because Onderon was legitimately aligned with the Confederacy, as their new king was a Confederate king. So they couldn't really be seen helping them in the Civil War because it would have been seen as an act of war. But they did offer assistance in training and help in an advisory capacity. They did things like coaching the rebels on how to use their blasters. And Stila actually impressed the Jedi on how well she adapted with the blaster rifle to become a sniper. They win their first victory with the Jedi's, training and utilizing some of their animals that they had trained, like big mammals that actually stomped on the droids. Clunkers as Saw called them. Clankers. They had several successful wins, but at one point Saw gets captured by the Puppet King and the Confederates. Stila comes to rescue him, but she gets captured herself. One of the members of King Rash, the Puppet King's court, Tandon, actually ends up siding with the rebels and refuses to carry out the orders that Rash had given him, and turns around and holds King Rash at laser point. He sides with the rebels and a huge battle breaks out. The Confederacy, on the orders of Dookie, I just love saying that, end up assassinating King Rash for his failures. Oh, you mean the sadistic psychos that you worked for killed you because of things you could not control? Imagine that. But during the battle, Stila hurries to the Roopings, which are these big flying things that are super awesome, and she goes to protect the rightful king, King Denduk. I would like to interrupt this broadcast to say, hi, Mike Boyle. Thanks for liking all my stuff. That was a fly. And Saw, with a pair of soldiers supported by Stila, distracting the gunships, he took aim and shot down the final gunship. Yay, Saw. As that ship crashes down, it smashes into a cliff face where Stila was protecting Denduk from several commando droids. The weakened cliff gives way. You can see what's about to happen here. And Saw is forced to watch in horror that his little sister Stila had fallen with it. So whereas he may have taken down the last gunship, he was taking down his sister as well. Well, Ahsoka grabs her using the Force and holds her to keep her from falling to her death. God, this is so dramatic and sad. Star Wars is the perfect emotional drama. But that gunship had remained partially active. It fired on Ahsoka, and hit her in the shoulder, and it distracted her concentration, which proved to be just enough and just long enough for her to break her concentration on her telekinetic hold of Stila. Saul ran in absolute panic and horror to his fallen sister as she fell to her death on the rocks below. As he cradled her now broken and lifeless body, he begins to blame himself that had he not shot that droid gunship down, she would still be alive. And it would be a guilt that would stay with him the rest of his life. Saul was always kind of a gruff man. He was always a natural born warrior and leader. But after the death of his sister, something changed in him. And for me, this is what makes Saw Gererra so relatable. His sister was what grounded him. If Saw was starting to go a little too extreme and too far over to the, oh my God, dude, what are you doing side, Stila always reined him back in. She was his heart. He was an incredibly passionate man with a strong sense of right and wrong. But when his sister Stila died, that anger he felt towards the Galactic Empire was amplified exponentially. He went from a true resistance fighter to a resistance terrorist. They were able to free their planet and return the rightful king to the throne. But it came at such a great cost that truly did stay and leave its mark on Saw. I mean, how could it not? At the end of the Clone Wars, the Republic was transformed into the Galactic Empire. I know you know that, okay? If you're watching this, you probably know that. Later, Saw brought Galen Erso, Lyra Erso, and Jyn Erso to the uninhabited planet of Lamu. Galen was an engineer for the Galactic Empire, but what the Empire had forced him to create horrified and terrified him so much that he needed to get away. That is where Saw came in, and he helped his family hide and escape. But unfortunately, Orson Krennic found them and took Jyn's parents away. Now, if you've seen Rogue One, then you know that Orson wasn't exactly clear on if they had a boy or a girl. So that was a little bit to the little girl's, benefit. And luckily for her, her parents and Saw Gererra had a plan in case something horrible like this were to happen. Now, up to this point, Saw has had dealings with virtually every important player in the Star Wars universe, in the Rebellion. We know that he knew Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin, and Master Yoda. He also had run-ins with Ezra Bridger and the crew of the Ghost. Did not always go great. They didn't always get along, but ended up respecting each other, respecting what each other had to do. Saw could definitely respect someone's beliefs, but what he couldn't respect was the fact that he felt that the rebellion had become weak and lax, and that it wasn't willing to do what was necessary to stop the evil Galactic Empire. He said that, you gotta get your hands dirty sometimes if you want this shit to work. And he considered Mon Mothma unable to pay the price that it would take. Saw considered that he himself had paid the price for freeing his people. What makes the rest of the rebellion better than him, that they don't have to pay that price, or they're too good to pay that price? Why should all these other people suffer when he and his sister was willing to pay the ultimate price? His guilt had made him bitter. Now, after he found Jyn in her little hidey hole in the desert, in a cave, he took her in as his own daughter. He loved her as his own daughter and raised her until she was 16. Unbeknownst to her, people in his cell, his resistance cell, and around it were starting to become suspicious as to where Jyn came from. Now remember, Krennic killed her mother and kidnaps her father and forces him back to work on what would be known as the Death Star. So she was the child of an Imperial engineer, an Imperial arms maker. He is making all these weapons and devices that are out there killing all these rebels and resistance fighters. So if people really found out who she was and who her parents were and what her father was doing, they would either kill her or they would kidnap her and use her, torture her to get to her father. As rough and tumble and bitter as Saw was these days, he did love Jyn like a daughter. He'd raised her from a small child. He cared for her. He didn't want to see that happen to her. So in his broken, sad mind, the best way he could achieve this was by basically abandoning her. He just abandons her and takes off and leaves her to take care of herself, which she took this as, piece of shit abandoned me. Like, my adoptive father has abandoned me. He doesn't want me around anymore. which was really sad. But they are reunited. An Imperial pilot who was in contact with Jyn Erso's father, Galen, defected. And he was directed by Galen to find Saw Gererra and take him this message. Well, like I had said before, Saw was an old dog of war. He'd lost his legs at this point. He couldn't breathe on his own. He was half machine at this point. On top of his embittered nature. He's this old war dog who just has been kicked to the ground so many times that this is what he comes to expect from people. He does not see people anymore as inherently good. He sees them as either stupid and collaborative. He only sees them as either on the side of the rebellion where, we're grown, we can lead ourselves. He either sees them as on the side of the rebellion, or he sees them as Imperial collaborators. And if you ever were an Imperial collaborator, you basically would be forever. How impossible it would be for someone to come out of that situation, to change their mind. People just don't really change their minds like that. So when this Imperial pilot does come to him, he is immediately untrusting of him, which, considering the circumstances, fair enough. But his solution to figure out if he's telling the truth or not is pretty flawed. He decides that the only way to see if he's telling the truth is to subject him to Borgullet, which is this creature that feeds off your mind and will let someone know if you're lying or not. But the results of this are you go crazy. Luckily, Jyn is able to talk some sense into him. They watch the message that they're supposed to take to the rebellion. And then in a demonstration of the power and to stop this information from getting out, this defector, they decide to basically blow up the whole of Jedha City, where Saw had been hiding out with his resistance cell. At this point, pretty much was on his own in the whole rebellion resistance world, because everyone had they were like, dude, you are crazy. You are crazy. You're an extremist. We don't want to play with you anymore. So he was kind of on his own, just kind of being a full-on terrorist at this point. So when the Empire blows up Jedha City, this wave is coming for them. And Saw's main concern is getting Jyn out of there. Now, when this starts happening, they don't say it ever, but I can almost guarantee you that what is going through Saw's mind is his sister, Steela. His love for Jyn reminds him of his sister, and Jyn is a lot like Steela. She's headstrong, she's independent, she's a fighter, so I am fairly certain that Saw is able to make these connections as well, on top of the fact that he loves her like a daughter and she's all he really has in the world. So with his main priority being to protect Jyn, his second thought is, I'm tired. I've been doing this a long time and I have experienced so much loss that I just want to know that Jyn's okay. She can take over from here. And so, as he makes sure that she leaves and survives, Saw waits for the end in his cave and watches the wave of destruction come towards him. He dies on his own terms. Saw is a character that we have watched grow big time. And I think he was also the first character that was made live action canon from the animated series. I think. I didn't confirm that, but if my timeline is correct, then he is. And to me, he seems to be one of the deeper characters in the Star Wars universe. He's got a lot going on, man. He has suffered and suffered and suffered. He has suffered physical losses, personal losses. Saw was a natural leader, as I said before. He had this gift for inspiring those around him with these fiery monologues and speeches. Like, if you were there listening to one of his impassioned diatribes, I mean, you'd be like, cool, okay, I'll join the cause. You totally make sense to me. But you watch him over time, especially after the loss of Stila, become more and more bitter and angry. Not that you could really blame him all that much. Here is a man who gave more to this cause than just about anyone else you knew. And he never truly got to see the payoff for that. But if it wasn't for Saw Gererra, his sister Stila, his adoptive daughter Jin Urso, then the rebellion would have never survived. It wouldn't have lasted long, and it certainly wouldn't have won against the evil Galactic Empire. After the devastation of his planet, what it took to get it back, the loss of his sister, he had a tendency of crossing that line or blurring that line between rebellion and terrorism, all in the pursuit of whatever it took to take down the empire. And whether he chose to admit it or not, in fact, I believe he did, it wasn't just freedom that he was after. It wasn't just freeing people that he was looking for. It was revenge. And not just against the empire, but revenge against himself. Because remember, he blamed himself for what happened to Stila. And for that reason, Saw felt that he owed it not only to his sister, to her memory, but to make up for the fact that she was not here to see this through herself, and that was his fault. So he owed it to her to see it through for her. He held himself to this high standard to be the one to do the hard thing, to make the hard choice, to get his hands dirty, because he felt like he deserved it. But it was Jin, his adopted daughter, that reminded him of what this rebellion was truly about in the first place. Hope. He saw that in her. I think the story of Saw Gererra is an excellent allegory for trauma survivors. You're used to carrying this sword. You're used to fighting all these battles just to have, that ounce of freedom, that ounce of self. But there does come a time when you don't have to fight anymore. You don't need that sword. It's time to lay that sword down. But how do you know when that is? How does one who's fought their entire life know what to do with yourself when it's time to lay that sword down? Where is the line where you stop becoming this freedom fighter and you start becoming the thing you've been fighting against the entire time? How do you know where that line is? And how do you know when not to cross it? Again, as Papa Lucas has said in the past, we are redeemed in our children. Not by our children necessarily, but in them. Our children are our legacies. We live forever through them. And whether or not Jin was a biological child is irrelevant. He raised her. He loved her. He saw parts of himself that he inspired into her. Parts of his sister. And because of this, he was able to recognize that there is always hope. There is still hope. There is still something that can be done. The world can be redeemed. You can be redeemed. Everything looks so different when you realize that your children are watching. So I feel like in those last moments when Saul recognizes that there is hope through Jin, that he had felt like at this point his work was done. He didn't have to fight anymore. He didn't want to fight anymore. He's tired. He had been on the run pretty much his entire life. So that's why he tells her, I'm not going to run anymore. I'm done with this. It's time for me to go. I just want to make sure you're okay. I genuinely love the character of Saw Gererra. I love how they have approached it. I love his character development. I love his arc. I think he's a phenomenal character. I think he's a relatable character and one that Star Wars definitely needed. I really look forward to seeing him pop up in Andor. At the recording of this video, Andor comes out in 2 whole days, so I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it with you guys this Sunday. He's gonna pop up, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what shenanigans he gets into. Well, that's gonna do it for me today, nerdlings, on the Rebel himself, Saw Gererra. Thanks again, Steve Long from Rogue One Radio, for suggesting this topic. If you would like to support the channel, please consider checking out our Patreon. There are 3 different levels for you to choose from, starting at $3 and going all the way up to $25, but each tier gives you special bonuses, merch, and, like Steve used, our suggestion box. We also have a Discord if you'd like to continue the discussion there. We have all the socials, and we also have a merch store on tpublic.com where you can get one of these or another t-shirt or a tank top or a phone case. The list goes on. I will be back next Saturday with a new character or story breakdown, and you can find me here every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, talking with a couple of my favorite people live with a live chat on whatever is going on in the nerd world that week. And I also want to thank our sponsor yet again, herbalhannah.com, for all your organic hygiene needs. Highly recommend herbalhannah.com. Use the promo code right here to get 10% off your first purchase. Tell them Danny sent you. But again, thanks for stopping by. Have a wizard day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.